All right, it's 1. I'm going to start. Please come find a seat. I'm going to start yakking. Everyone can come to the front. I know it's not. I know no one's going to, but there are seats in the front. No. All right. Welcome everyone to the first DataFusion meetup. It's very exciting. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to try my best. So, go ahead and move this up. There we go. So I'm going to, because I have you now as a captive audience, I'm going to sort of have some remarks. We'll start, and then we'll go into what we hope to get out of the rest of the day. So the first thing is I need to thank our sponsor, aka my employer. Influx Data sponsored this food, the room. If you'd like swag, it's on the back of the table. Feel free to do that. So thank you very much. Not only did they obviously sponsor the room today, but they've also been a huge supporter of open source in general. And so thank you. Part of the reason why I'm up here is our new version of Influx is all very focused on DataFusion. I have a whole talk on Thursday. We'll talk all about this. I'm not going to talk about it here. Instead, I'm going to focus maybe more on the community part. So I'll explain what I'm going to do, but I want to offer a few reflections, and we'll go through sort of the goals and logistics of what we'll do for the rest of the day. So this is me, somewhat old picture. I am embarrassed to admit when I was doing the numbers the other day that I've been doing enterprise software for 21 years now. Exactly what's probably I'm old enough to drink, but I think it also gives me some amount of credibility because I'm about to go sort of offer some high-level observation between enterprise software and open source software. So I've at least been doing it for a while. So here is basically my expectation when I joined Influx 4 years ago of what working in open source was going to be like. In case of those of you who don't know, this is Bodie McBoatface. This is like the classic example of what happens when you ask the internet to do something for you, right? So this was the British government had some fancy new research vessel that was going to do something, and they put an online poll of like, what does the internet think we should name this thing? And the internet, in its infinite wisdom, right, came up with Bodie McBoatface. And that's like 130,000 votes, right? It was like a crazy number of people. And so obviously the British government, right, like they politely said, no effing way, right? The British way, like, we'll find a more suitable name. But like, to me, this is the canonical thing where this was my expectation going in. I just needed a programming job. Paul's like, we're gonna do it open source. Like, all right, fine, whatever, right? Like, we're doing too much energy. So those are my expectations going in. But the reality, right, is actually quite different. It's been wonderful, right? Like, we basically have a system that's, I think, interesting enough that we got a paper published in Sigmod. If you guys hadn't heard that, we got a paper that describes DataFusion, right? We're in Sigmod, and I think that's quite different than Bodie McBoatface, right? So so what I'm trying to do now is like, well, what's different about it, right? Like, how did it actually work? Because if you just, like, how do you get if I try to explain to people, like, what do I do? Oh, I write software with a whole bunch of people on the internet, right? They're like, Bodie McBoatface. So I think something that is like the core mind shift, and it doesn't seem like a big difference, but really was that DataFusion, right, is not a product that we are providing. Like, we is either the Apache Software Foundation or the royal we, myself, or other committers, right? Like, I don't view it that way. Uh-oh. I think we lost power. Hang on. Anyway, I know this slide. The point is, it's not a product we're building, right? It's basically a thing we're building together. And I know it seems like a tiny, tiny difference, but it's a huge difference. So it goes from like people show up, they have a bug, or like that they need something fixed. It actually turns into, why don't you help work with us together and get it fixed, right? So to me, I know it sounds like maybe it doesn't seem like a big deal, but that to me is at least how I live now. Like, people file bugs, I don't feel like I have to go fix them anymore. Maybe do fix them, I help people fix them, but it's not about that. What do we think? Do we lose it entirely? Oh, it's coming. It's rebooting. All right. Yeah. It's slowly warming. So I guess to me, that was the biggest shift I had to go through, was mentally thinking about this not as something that we were going to like present to someone or the world, but it was something we were building together. This is not much longer than this slide was meant to be talked about. We got done. Yeah, right. All right. Anyway, I think I elaborated to death. We're building this together, right? That's basically the point of this. So specifically, what does that mean? And I spent a lot of time in my last job dealing with like a 300 person that, you know, can't we can talk about this, but like there's a lot of engineers working on a big enterprise code base, right? So I saw what a big software project was like. And so there's some major differences working on these open source projects. The first is you don't need to fix all the bugs, which I know it sounds bad. I don't care about quality. It's exactly the opposite, but it's that if someone else shows up with a problem, it's much better to help and encourage them and other people to fix it than, and if you told me this, by the way, 4 years ago, I would have said you're crazy, right? There's no way people on the internet are going to show up and fix bugs right in your software. It actually turns out not to be true. People do it all the time. And the number of bugs we have in DataFusion is shockingly low, I think. At least certainly compared to my enterprise software experience. And I think the other major thing that's very different is you think about it as like open source, you get the code, do what you want with it. It's different than open contribution. I think one of the guys who worked at Influx worked this way, but like rather than having committers or potential contributors show up and like have to convince you to contribute that what they want to do will contribute to your project is worthwhile. I think DataFusion for sure, like we just assume whatever they want to do is correct, right? We basically open contribution, whatever you want to add, you want to help us. That doesn't mean we merge every PR or whatever, right? But like the default assumption is we're going to accept it. And that's definitely different than enterprise software. I don't know about you guys, but like there's been a variety of heated discussions of various types in my enterprise software days. I'm quite pleased. There's actually been very few of that, very little of that in the open source. I think partly that's because if people want to go rant or whatever, there's plenty of places to go rant on the internet. And they can just go with something else, right? So, and maybe it's like Rust filters out a lot, maybe database internals filters out a lot, right? There's a bunch of speculation, but it's been very nice not to have to deal with that. The other thing that was really, I still don't fully get it, is people ask me, well, what's the roadmap for DataFusion? And if you're an enterprise software company, it makes a lot of sense. Like you've got a company, you got resources, you have like a goal that you're trying to accomplish. Whereas DataFusion doesn't have just like resources hanging around, right? It's got people who are contributing. So I think it took a while to get the mind shift of people who drive the roadmap are the people who are actively doing the contributions. And you can see that, right? People who showed up and had something they want to do. This is, by the way, very salient to those of you who want to know how to get more involved, right? It's like basically find something that's important to you on your roadmap that you can drive back into DataFusion that would help other people. It's still wild, like we don't have a roadmap yet, we have a query engine. It's still shocking. Now, of course, there's a lot of similarities, right? The first is, I would recommend you all, whatever you're doing, right? You just like, there's a human on the other side of the keyboard, and they submit something, like it's really important to like acknowledge that they are trying to help, right? You start with the assumption that it's a piece of crap and it never should merge. You start the whole conversation, you know, not that I haven't seen that a couple of times before, but like if you start the conversation that way, it's very hard to recover. Whereas if you start with like, thank you for the contribution, it has a lot of, you know, here's XYZ way that we got to make it better. So speaking of making it better, hugely thing that I've seen very destructive elsewhere is if you just provide a bunch of criticism on a PR, but don't really explain how to make it go forward, right? That's very demotivating to everyone. You spend a bunch of time, the person who's contributing doesn't really know whether it's going to be accepted or not. Should they spend any more time? So making it clear, do this, right? And then we'll merge it. Sounds, again, really simple, but it makes a big difference. Also, I don't know about you guys, but like letting a PR sit for several days is really bad. So I get like anxious, like physically anxious when there's like PRs standing out. There's still too many. There's also a subtle hint to like help me review them, please. Yeah, and also the other thing that's wild to me is the same thing, right? I've done this in enterprise software now for many years. If you write up a clear description of like what you want done and why, even if it's not on someone's priority roadmap, it's shocking how often it'll get done because other people haven't gone through the trouble of explaining clearly what they want done, right? That's one way to think about it. So I'm not trying to subvert the influx data prioritization process, Paul, but when I care something, like when I think something's important, like one way I do it is you write up a clear description of why it's important and what to do. And it has a shocking effectiveness of getting done. Speaking of that, let me show you an example, right? So one of the influx engineers at one of our offsites was saying, oh, she was trying to do something with the data frame API. And it was kind of hard to figure out what it was. So I sat there, all right, watch this, Carol. So I sat down and wrote up a ticket, right? And honest to God, 16 minutes between filing this ticket, right? Like someone's like, all right, I'll do it. And they did it. It's I mean, it's kind of like a parlor trick, but it's like, it works. It's amazing. It's a huge thrill. By the way, also, again, like, so that file clear tickets, please, right? You want something done. I think you'll actually be quite surprised with how it gets done. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Hope you have to forgive me here. I need to talk about this too, right? Like, DataFusion is an open source project. If you're not careful, that can turn into some, philosophical debate about whether we're giving back to humanity or whatever. But I think there's room for both. So like, I obviously like getting paid. That's good. Influx Data is a commercial entity, right? It's responsible to its shareholders, investors, whatever. And at the end of the day, DataFusion is good for our bottom line, in my opinion, right? Because it allows us to build a product we never could have built before for much less money. So that's like the capitalistic view of things. But I think there's also a bigger, more altruistic view of it, that they don't have to like be opposed. It's a little sappy, but like, in some ways, making sure that people get access to this low-level technology, I think in general drives the whole system efficiency forward. Right. So I think it's a greater good, and it's part of what motivates me. And obviously the pay part is a big part of it too. So, at the end of the day, I think more people will build more, better, cheaper stuff. A bunch of people in this room are doing that, like a bunch of people who are not in this room are doing that. So I think they can both coexist. I think it's too simplistic to think about open source as being one or the other, at least DataFusion. All right. A few more things I'm going to foist upon you. In the early days of DataFusion, I think it was not at all clear that being part of the Apache Solware Foundation was a good idea. There's a bunch of overhead that comes with that, as people will be happy to tell you about. But I think it's been, by the way, I'm not unbiased, I'm quite a biased source, but I'm just going to make you my pitch of like why it's really important to be part of Apache. So what are the benefits? At the core, it's because it's just predictable. That's the root cause of it. So what does that actually mean? To my mind, like, there's no license risk. Apache software license, I checked it. It's 20 years old. It hasn't been changed in 20 years. I don't think it's going to be changed at all. In the next 20 would be my guess. But, you see a bunch of open source companies now having to change their licensing as the business climate changes. And I think that's one thing you get insulated from as being part of the Apache Foundation. The communication pattern, I think some people still find a little clunky. I'm not trying to diss the mailing list or whatever, but some of the newer engineers come up like, oh, this mailing list, what is that thing, right? Like, that's what my parents used before I was born, right? But, and not that we have to, but the point is, like, the mandate on communication, open communication, is really, really important. And so if you want to know what's going on at any level of detail, you can go look at it, right? And it's there. Now, that doesn't mean someone's gone through the trouble of filtering it, summarizing it for you, like it's a fire hose, but it's there. And I think that's really valuable. So you don't feel like stuff's happening in the dark, or you don't get surprised by major changes. Or if you do get surprised, it's on you because you weren't following along, which is not the same, right? If you're working on an open source piece of code that someone else controls, right? And all of a sudden they change direction. I think it's been super effective at actually engendering multi-vendor participation, right? Like, some people ask, well, did Influx make this? Like, no, Influx didn't make this. Someone else in this room made this, but that's coming later. But in general, I think the fact that it's part of Apache lets multiple vendors participate in a way that you wouldn't be otherwise. And I think the other thing is, to me, having this foundation, building the community, actually provides a story for long-term maintenance that's insulated from people's like people have kids, right? Or they get burned out, or they go do some other job, or like whatever, like that just happens. And so if you haven't gone through the trouble of building the community that can sustain the piece of software, you're gonna be in real trouble because there's no one to maintain it anymore. And likewise, like, this corporate strategy shifts we're talking about, right? It's the shifts of like how you're going to monetize open source kind of evolves over time. As part of Apache, you basically have the predictability that won't be happening. Boy, the VC funding cycles, right? Like, whatever the next shiny thing is going to be, maybe it'll be database, maybe not. So I think it's been great, and it worked way, way better than I ever could have imagined, right? It's quite simple in a lot of ways. It's just like, make everything open, right? but it's very, very effective. So I'm getting close to the end of my yakking. So there's a new top level project. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. In some ways, you could just think about this as like it goes from Apache Arrow DataFusion to just Apache DataFusion. So we're just missing a word. But I think that's very exciting. Just to give you all an update that we discussed it at length. One of the motivations here is, by the way, now when we try to discuss like how to grow the committer base, grow the PMC base with the Arrow PMC and committer base, the problem is a lot of DataFusion people now are just focused on DataFusion. So there's a lot less overlap than there was in the early days. And so a bunch of the other Arrow PMCs, like I just don't have the context really to help this community anymore. And it's now gotten big enough to sustain itself. So that's basically the plan. It's basically been approved from not like no promises, but I expect it to just basically be rubber stamped at the next ASF board meeting. We've got all that stuff. We have a bunch of tasks, right? You'll notice a theme, by the way, in this talk. Please come help, right? Like once this happens, we'll have to switch over names and whatever, but it'll be good. So anyway, help, right? I'm not doing this for you. You guys are doing this all with me together. All right. So in conclusion, I think it's a great time. I've had a wonderful time geeking out with everyone. Get to do low-level databasey stuff, get to talk about, we found a community of people who's also interested in that type of thing, which, it's a select group of individuals who will get excited about this. And my personal goal, as I continue to tell everyone, is like, I want 1,000 projects using DataFusion. And we're seeing like, we're well on our way here today. So that's it. That's the introductory spiel. Now we'll do like more interesting stuff. Anything else? Comments here? All right, let's start. So first, these are the goals, I think, when I first did it. The real core of the goals of today, right, is to build community. It's not to listen to us, me, yak, necessarily. Like, I'm sorry, even though I am making you listen to me for 20 minutes. The goal is not really to sit here and listen to presentations for 4 hours, because we could do that online at home at 1.5 speed on YouTube, and it'll be more efficient. Instead, the goal is actually to build a community like the people in this room. And so I hope I have a program that will help us do that. I also wanted to make it very clear, like, DataFusion community is much, much bigger than the people in this room, right? Like, you're all the ones who are able to join us. That's great. But please, like, help write down as much as you can, anything that comes out of here, interesting things you came up with, because I think it's very important. All right, so here's the schedule. We've already had lunch. You just listen to me yak about this. What we're next going to do is we're going to talk. I think there's 6 or 7 individual talks or sort of just discussions, and basically all of you are going to get up and explain how you use DataFusion in various different ways, which is going to be great. During that time, I don't know if we're going to actually have the stamina to sit through like 2 hours of presentations, or maybe we'll take some breaks. You should, by the way, all feel free to go, get the coffee or whatever this fine WeWork establishment offers. And then we'll have a brief break depending on how this, I don't really, it's like I asked the internet, who wants to give some presentations? I got a bunch of people who say presentations. I don't really know how long it's going to go. I expect it to go approximately an hour and a half, but it could go longer, or maybe shorter. Then we'll break for a little bit, and then I want to do something that I hope will work well, which was we'll basically just have formal sort of discussion groups. Like I just want people to break up into groups, talk about whatever. I have a bunch of proposed topics to seed you that are serving my interests, but obviously we'll talk about whatever, and then we'll just do that for 2 or 3 times, and at the end we'll conclude. So that's basically the goal. At the end, then I have a couple final things, including a quiz for the final wrap up, which hopefully will keep you at least here for some of it. And then from 5 to 7, actually I'll explain that in a second. There's a DataFusion social if you'd like to come. And then there's this pre-party thing, which I don't really know anything about other than it came out, something related to Data Council and offered free food and beer. So that's why I'm going. But if you'd like to, the link came out in the Data Council. All right. So the plan for the DataFusion social, 5 o'clock, is we're going to walk down to this place on whatever this is, 6th Street, called the Rustic Tap. You're all welcome. I don't think we're offering to buy beer. Thank you for people who helped organize it. Cheng, who I think is here. Yeah. So, all right. Any questions? All right. So with that, I think what I'd like to do now is we're going to spend like 5 minutes, not too much more. Just like we should just go around and introduce people, because there's enough people here. I think detailed introductions maybe is too much, but like maybe your name, your GitHub handle, maybe an optional affiliation or whatever, and then we'll proceed. So my name is Andrew A. Lamb, and you just listened for 20 minutes, so I don't need to do any more introductions.